Adam, Eve, a talking snake, a piece of forbidden fruit. I mean, it's one of the most famous stories on the planet, right? A foundational story for literally billions of people. We all feel like we know the story of the fall, but what if the story we think we know is actually more of a later myth than what the original text says? What if the message of Genesis 3 is something way more subtle and honestly, a lot weirder and more profound?
Okay, let's just jump right in. On the left, you've got the popular version, the one we all know. It's all about original sin, the devil in disguise tricking everyone, and a really angry God handing out punishments. But when you actually read the text itself, a totally different picture starts to emerge. The story seems to be focused on a simple act of disobedience, a surprisingly clever wild animal, and a God who responds not just with anger, but with something that looks a whole lot more like deep, personal anguish. And that's the tension we're going to unpack.
So, where do we even begin with this? Well, let's start by re-examining the key players right there in the garden, the snake, the tree, and what this test was all about in the first place.
First things first, the snake. In the original Hebrew, it's Nahash. Now, the text doesn't introduce this character as the devil or Satan. It's actually much simpler, almost mundane. Genesis 3, verse 1, just calls it one of the wild creatures God had made, and its defining feature isn't pure evil. It's that it was clever, or arum. This idea of the snake being the literal embodiment of evil, that's a much, much later interpretation.
And you can actually watch this identity evolve over centuries. It's fascinating. In Genesis, it's just a clever creature. But then, in other Old Testament books like Job and Isaiah, that snake imagery gets connected to this epic, mythical sea dragon, a symbol of cosmic chaos. And it's not until you get to the New Testament, we're talking hundreds of years later, that the snake from the garden is finally explicitly identified with the dragon, with Satan, the great accuser.
So, what about the tree? Well, the sources we're looking at suggest this whole situation was really a test of maturity. See, the knowledge of good and bad wasn't some evil thing in itself. It was something God fully intended for humanity to have, but as a gift, in His own time. The big failure wasn't wanting the knowledge, it was in taking it prematurely, refusing to trust and wait on the one giving the gift. It was, at its heart, a failure to listen.
And this brings us to maybe the most surprising character in the entire story, God. I mean, we need to forget that image of a thundering, all-knowing, furious judge for a minute. The text, when you read it closely, reveals a divine personality that's way more relational, and you discover it through the questions He asks.
Think about it. After they eat the fruit, they hide. And God's first question isn't some angry, I know what you did. It's, where are you? The source material suggests this isn't the question of an all-knowing God laying a trap. It's an invitation. It's like a parent calling out to a hiding child, giving them a chance to come out on their own and start to make things right.
And then comes the next question. Adam says he was afraid because he was naked, and God asks, who told you that you were naked? Again, this doesn't sound like a rhetorical gotcha question. It sounds like a genuine inquiry. It's the kind of question you ask when you're trying to figure something out, to understand this new, painful reality that's suddenly sprung up in your relationship.
And finally, he turns to Eve and asks, "What is this that you have done?" The sources argue this isn't just a question of anger. You can almost hear the heartbreak in it. It's a cry of pain from a creator whose beautiful relationship with his creation has just been shattered.
So here's the really radical idea behind all this. The story seems to be presenting a God who willingly limits His own knowledge to make space for a real mutual relationship. By asking questions He doesn't already have the answers to, He gives humanity the room to reveal themselves freely, to confess. It's a model of a relationship based on freedom, where God learns and finds things out through that relationship, not just by some automatic all-knowing power.
Okay, so if God is this relational being, how does He handle the aftermath? The popular story says He just rains down curses on everybody. But, and you're probably sensing a theme here, the text is much more careful, telling a story that's more about consequences than curses.
And this table just lays it out so clearly. Look at it. The text is very specific. It says the snake is cursed. Cursed are you. And it says the ground is cursed. But look at the lines for the woman and the man. The phrase, cursed are you, is missing. Instead, God describes the painful new realities of their lives, the pain of motherhood, the rise of patriarchy, the endless toil of work. These are heartbreaking descriptions of life in a broken world, not direct curses placed on the people themselves.
And get this source points out this subtle but really powerful clue in the original grammar.
The text says God actively blesses people, but when it comes to the ground, it says the ground is cursed. It's almost like the writer is hesitant to make God the direct agent of cursing. It suggests that blessing is God's default setting, his first nature, and that cursing just isn't.
Okay, so all of this, the clever snake, the relational God, the consequences instead of curses, it all brings us to the biggest question of all, the one that completely reframes the entire story. Was it really a fall?
This might be the most shocking takeaway for a lot of people. The word fall never, not once, appears in Genesis 3. In fact, it's not used anywhere in the entire Bible to describe this event. That's a label that was stuck on much, much later.
So what's the big deal? Well, the words we use matter. A fall makes you think of humanity living in this perfect, blissful, immortal state and then just plummeting into ruin. But the language of a loss feels so much closer to what the text describes. It wasn't about losing perfection so much as failing to realize a beautiful possibility. The relationship with God wasn't totally broken, but it was deeply damaged. And they didn't fall from a state of immortality, they lost access to the gift of lasting life, which was symbolized by that other tree, the tree of life.
You see, using the word fall actually creates a bunch of problems the text itself doesn't have. Genesis never describes some kind of heaven-on-earth bliss that they fell from. And their relationship is clearly damaged, but hey, they're still talking with God even after they've been exiled. Plus, this isn't some once-and-for-all moral flip. In the very next chapter, Cain is told he has the ability and the responsibility to master sin. The scholar John Goldingay, whose work we're drawing from here, just puts it perfectly. He says, "The tragedy of Genesis 1 through 3 is not that human beings fell from a state of bliss, but that they failed to realize a possibility. It's a story of what could have been."
So where does this all leave us? It means Genesis 3 is not some simple, tidy little fable meant to explain why the world is a broken place. It is so much more complicated and interesting than that. What it is this incredibly deep and sophisticated story about the painful journey into maturity. It's about the overwhelming, sometimes terrifying complexity of freedom. It's about the nature of relationships. And it's about the very beginning of the human struggle, a struggle that, let's be honest, continues in every single one of us.
In fact, our source offers one last, pretty provocative way to think about it. With all its strange twists and ironies, you've got a talking animal, a god who has to ask questions, punishments that don't seem to perfectly fit the crime. The story almost resembles a farce or an episode of a sitcom. It's messy, it's unexpected, and it's deeply, deeply human. And that really leaves us with a final question to chew on. What do we stand to gain in our understanding of ourselves, of God, of the world, when we stop looking for simple myths and instead have the courage to embrace the beautiful, challenging, and often strange complexity of our foundational stories?